Just when I thought I was out, I made another video. Hang on, let me watch.
Just when I thought I was out.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. To keep these videos brief, I'm going to glaze over a lot of stuff. But I watched episodes 2, 3, and 4 of season 1 of The Sopranos, and this is the stuff that stood out to me on my third rewatch. It's a bit of a clunky start. How's my hair look? It looks great. So HBO didn't do a full season order until 10 months after the completion of shooting the pilot, which is evident by the dramatic physical change from Anthony Jr. from episodes 1 to 2. I know those clothes came from a well-stocked Husky section at Target. Bring the Husky section back. The world you grew up in doesn't exist anymore. Besides the ossification of Anthony Jr., another major difference is the retconning of Jackie Aprile as top dog in the crime family. So in the pilot, Charmaine refers to Tony as
the Dawn of New Jersey.
But then in episode 2, Junior introduces Jackie Aprile to the show like this.
Jackie, you're the boss.
In the context of how television was made, especially in the 90s, it makes sense to have Tony as the boss right away in the pilot. Pilots were, and are, a pitch to network executives and audiences to give them an idea of what your show will be about. And that can sometimes be in conflict with the best spot to start characters narratively for a whole series. So while Tony being number 1 is best for the pilot, I think it's a more interesting choice to have him not be number 1 to start the series. We get to see the scheming and power struggle around the succession, which naturally sets up the Junior and Tony conflict, and we get to see Tony grapple with the imminent death of Jackie, someone he loves. But I will say, watching episode 1 and episode 2 back to back without considering any of the context outside of the show, it's really jarring. This also isn't the only clunky thing between the two episodes. We also see the characters talk about the Italian mob movies quite a few times again in episode 2. Like Sil, 3 separate times, says,
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
And we also have the boys watching a news piece about John Gotti and an ex-made man talking about selling his life story, which all feels like a big retread of the Godfather and Goodfellas references and Christopher saying he's going to sell his life story to Hollywood from the pilot. I mean, hell, Martin Scorsese even shows up in this episode. Super funny that Christopher shouts out that he liked Kundun, Martin Scorsese's biopic about the Dalai Lama, which Disney actively kneecapped the release of in order to not piss off the Chinese government, who does not want positive movies being made about Tibetan leaders. Just sort of a fun nod to a widely underseen Scorsese film. There's also some stuff with Silvio that makes him seem like a friend of the mob in the pilot as opposed to Tony's right-hand man in the rest of the series. It's a small detail, but in the pilot while at the Bing, Silvio instructs the waitresses that these guys drink for free. As opposed to episode 2, it seems more like the mob might just outright own the Bing. It also seems like Silvio doesn't know that Tony knows Artie Bucco very well in the pilot, when supposedly they've all known each other for years and years. There's a few other small inconsistencies, and I'm almost tempted to say skip episode 1 entirely and go right into episode 2, but that doesn't really work either. They just set up too much stuff in the pilot for a new viewer to skip right into the series. Also, I think both episodes are good. They just don't work one right after another. But hey, you gotta start somewhere. So Tony is considering stopping therapy out of caution. If anybody found out that he was seeing Dr. Melfi, he could be whacked. And Sil almost coincidentally sees him while attending a dentist appointment. Also, this isn't the building I'd expect Melfi's office to be in. Her office is just so cool, and like this is a run-of-the-mill medical park type of office. A sicko architect went insane designing Melfi's office, and it's just kind of a funny detail that it's in this carpeted hallway opposite a dentist. Another thing about Melfi's office, this is not my take, can't take credit for this one, but the room is round, which I've seen people suggest that represents Melfi's inability to really corner or pin Tony down because he lies to her constantly. Which, like, Tony, you can't lie to your therapist, brother. Huge waste of time. Also, we can assume Tony doesn't like giving up power to Melfi in their sessions. In every other relationship in his life, Tony is the top dog. But in therapy, he sort of has to willingly give up control, and that's understandably tough for him. So out of paranoia and I think a desire to take some power back in his relationship with Melfi, Tony has a cop follow her. The cop himself is a loose alcoholic cannon and is in debt to Tony a couple thousand from sports gambling. Tough to say whether this guy was messed up before meeting Tony or just after, but either way, it's another example of Tony preying on someone's worst instincts to use them to get what he wants. The officer tails Melfi and her date, pulls them over, and assaults the guy. And as we see later in the episode, Melfi's date is traumatized from this event, as anybody would be. And the cop's findings about Melfi are benign. She's regular. So this was really all for nothing. Melfi, of course, doesn't know that this whole thing was Tony's fault, and there's sort of a funny exchange when Tony apologizes for it.
But the worst part of it is my relationship with him will never be the same.
Sorry.
Oh, it wasn't your fault.
After this, Tony decides to continue therapy, and I think in part his paranoia was satisfied, but also I think subconsciously he was able to put himself back in charge of the situation with Melfi. And this also reminds me of the Artie Bucco Vesuvio situation, except worse. Like, Artie at least was aware that he was tangential to the mob. Melfi's date is literally just some guy whose only sin is he wanted to go on a date with Melfi and lives in New Jersey. Tony's gravity is strong. And much like how he described his mother as a poison cloud hanging over him, Tony is his own sort of malicious poison cloud, damaging the people in his surroundings. I think we get two great visual metaphors in this block of episodes. The first is with Anthony Jr.'s teacher's car. The car gets stolen and Tony enlists Pussy and Polly to get it back. By the time they find the guys who did it, the car has been chopped up and they have the guys steal the same make and model and repaint it to replace it. Pretty much anything these guys do is accomplished with violence or through the threat of violence, and Pussy and Polly both have blood on their hands. Okay, only a little bit in this specific side quest, but nonetheless. Also, the car being a different color on the inside parallel all these mob guys' lives. They present as one thing on the outside, but if you look closely at all, you'll see the outer personas are just a cheap paint job, and their true colors are shining through. The paint is not dry on any of these guys. The other shot I wanted to talk about was the one where Mikey Palmisi kills Brendan. Brendan was a bad guy, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But his addiction to meth and other drugs is ultimately what got him killed. The drug not only fed into his worst instincts, which led him to jack another one of Junior's trucks against Tony's specific instructions, but it also put a stigma on him and his community. When deciding which one, Brendan or Christopher, to whack as retribution, I think Junior leans to Brandon in part because of Brendan's reputation as an addict, and of course because of Livia's affection for Christopher. The cigarette floating in the water with the blood behind it, addiction, is ultimately what killed Brendan. Speaking of drugs, let's talk about the Meadow and Hunter wanting meth storyline.
We want to score some crystal.
What the hell? This was always so crazy to me in all my watches. Like, two 16-year-old girls want meth to study for the SATs. In general, I like the way the series is able to balance the relatively low-stakes storylines with the kids compared to Tony's schemes. So I think it's fun that we're cutting away to Meadow and Hunter stressing about school a lot. It fills out the world and also shows how Tony's other life bleeds into everything around him. Third time through, though, this storyline feels a little insane. Like, they want meth of all drugs? Admittedly, it's sort of hard to imagine meth in a pre-Breaking Bad world now, and I've seen a lot of stuff that a majority of meth addicts are living pretty normal presenting lives. Not to say the drug isn't really bad or dangerous. I just read an article once that was like, meth addiction is not what you think it is. And essentially, the article was saying that people can use meth for years in a regular middle-class 9-to-5 lifestyles before it totally destroys their life. Sure, like maybe it makes sense that they want meth to study, but it's just out of left field for me every time. Like they didn't want Ritalin. I think this story serves more to show us that Brandon sucks, and we're not going to miss him when he's gone because he's sitting on both Hunter and Meadow, high schoolers. And that Christopher is terrified of Tony. Brandon gets killed by Mikey Palmisi, but Christopher gets dragged out to the docks and dry fired to the head to scare him. He mistakenly assumes it's because he gave meth to Meadow, which I think is kind of a stretch for his character. It's weird that Meadow wants meth. It's weirder that Christopher would get her meth knowing that Tony would kill him for it. He justifies this by being like,
Meadow wanted the crystal. If I didn't get it to her, she would have went down Jefferson Avenue. Tell Tony they would have beat it.
which, like, sure, you don't want Meadow to get hurt getting meth by herself, but the other option is just to tell Tony, and then Meadow hates you, I guess? Instead, he's risking his life to get Meadow high, which I just don't really think makes that much sense. And like, I don't know, Christopher is an addict in a lot of ways in his own regards. I mean, that's kind of how his storyline ends up. So I guess you could be like, he's not thinking clearly, blah, 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 blah. But I just don't really buy this when I start really thinking about it. It feels like they sacrificed a bit of logic here to show how much of a dirtbag Brandon is and how sort of morally corrupt and scared of Tony that Christopher is. But we get this iconic fit, so it's not all bad. Also, we get this hilarious shot of the girls tweaked out at choir. These girls are geeked! Livia feels so old for 70. And it kind of makes me think about how in the reboot of Sex and the City, all of these actresses are the same age as the first episode of The Golden Girls. And like, It's just like, as time has gone on, we've totally reframed what being old is and when being old starts. So, anyways, just watching this back, I'm like, Olivia's a very old 70 in 2026 terms. I like the parallel with Livia and Georgie not being able to work the phones. Tony is so frustrated they both can't figure out how to use the phone, and he eventually takes it out on Georgie. I think part of what I like about this parallel is, as much as Tony wants Livia to be with it, she obviously isn't as sharp as she once was, which is something that Melfi points out to Tony as well. But Tony doesn't see her that way, and I think part of it is that Livia can't both be this menacing presence in his life and this little old lady, because that would mean that Tony is weak in some regards. So Tony insists that she's this capable bull of a person, despite her limited ability, which I think is part of the reason he's so upset that she can't use the phone that well. He's also frustrated that Georgie can't use the phone that well, and he takes the frustration from both situations and beats the hell out of Georgie with the phone, to vent. Tony has high expectations for everyone around him and is frustrated by the state of the world, which that goes back to him in episode 1 talking about how you can't even find good guys to lay grout and tile anymore. He feels like the world is in decline. But really, it's just like, Tony, some guys aren't good at phones. And that's okay. Also, while we're on Livia, I forget how racist she is. I forget how racist kind of all the characters are until I'm watching it again. Like, Livia drives her black nurse to quit because she's so brutal to her. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree either. Tony corners the nurse and tells her not to smoke ganja around his mother. The whole show, all these characters staunchly defend their Italian heritage and community, in part because Italians were discriminated against when first immigrating to America. And then to dish that discrimination back out to other groups is ironic, and also not unique to Italian Americans. I like this whole Paulie is upset that Italians didn't invent Starbucks in the show. Paulie sees Italians as this discriminated against class whose culture is being appropriated, which is a funny take. Not to zoom too far out, but the other thing that gets me about this is he doesn't know that the people who are working there or who own the franchise aren't of Italian descent. He just assumes so because they're not the type of freaking stinking Italian that he is. I'm not trying to say this corporation is representing Italy in a genuine way. I mean, I think as soon as you have a board of shareholders, the fiduciary duty of it all supersedes any kind of need for cultural authenticity. But it's not like Paulie is a really deeply educated guy about the homeland either. This is anecdotal, but at a party once, I was chatting with an Italian who was in America for film school, and I asked her something to the effect of, do you think it's interesting how Americans are like, yeah, I'm Italian American? She was like, yes, that essentially Italian American culture at the same time is so different from Italian culture while insisting it's not that far removed. I'm reminded of White Lotus Season 2, when Michael Imperioli's character and his family go to visit the Italian countryside where they trace their lineage and show up unannounced at their distant relative's home. And their Italian family doesn't give a shit, like at all. I think about that scene a lot because I think to a lot of Americans of European descent, we view our ancestors' country of origin as sort of a holy land that we expect to be welcome home to in a sense. But the people who live in those countries just sort of view us as Americans. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's something uniquely American with Paulie's attitude that he feels like his culture is being appropriated, but really, he doesn't know much about the culture. I think what Paulie is feeling here is greed more than anything else. My man wants money. What can you do? Something else that has been standing out to me is how sensitive really all these mob guys are, but especially in these episodes, Tony is worried a lot about being perceived as dumb. Like when he's looking into a painting in Melfi's waiting room and essentially accuses her of some Harvard Jedi mind trick that he's too smart to fall for. Or when Shlomo tells Tony that he's a Gollum, and he's like, what the hell are those? Our boy is sensitive. I keep thinking about this whole strong silent type thing. Tony, my man, you are too sensitive to be silent. Let's talk more about Shlomo Tiedelman, the head of the Jewish crime family, enlisting Tony to fix an issue they're having with his daughter's husband. While negotiating the plan, Shlomo's son says,
Du hast beschatte Gollum hier. Punkt für the Rav in the Meiser. Ist auch was Atem.
Not going to pretend I'm an expert on this, but essentially a golem in Jewish tradition and stories is a protector of sorts created by a rabbi who eventually destroys or harms the thing that they set out to protect. Sorry if that's not 100%. I'm not reading all that. And yeah, Tony is a golem. We see it a lot throughout the series. People come to Tony for help, and after receiving the help, they almost always end up with a worse, more Italian problem. The most common example, which comes up a lot, is if Tony or one of his guys lends you money, your short-term financial problem might be solved, but now you have an incredibly high-interest loan that the mob will exploit you to collect. Tony fixes their problem, and then Tony fixes these guys' problem, and then Shlomo does try to change the terms of the deal, but not without compensation, which Tony rejects with violence, and now Shlomo is in a worse place than where he started. And Shlomo calls Tony a monster. It's not like Tony is without a conscience. He doesn't like to be considered a monster, which leads to sort of this funny conversation with Melfi.
Do you feel like Frankenstein? A thing? Lacking humanity? Lacking human feelings?
All right, I don't want to get too Frankenstein's monster about this, but generally, in the many renditions of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster has humanity and the capability to learn. It's only when the world around him rejects him is what drives the monster to violence, depending on what Frankenstein you're watching. So while I don't think Melfi's posing of Frankenstein is totally nonsensical, it's not really the point of the story of Frankenstein. This is also highlighted when one of Anthony Jr.'s friend's dads is scared of Tony at a garden store. So Tony's caught between two worlds. He does monstrous things, and he also does not want to be perceived as a monster. So the Buccos have to move into a smaller house post the Vesuvio explosion because the insurance money from the restaurant has not come through, and may not after they investigate for arson. This is also another parallel to the Melfi boyfriend thing, where the victim is complaining directly to Tony, and he's like, yikes.
Who would burn down a perfectly good restaurant? Sorry, honey.
Carmela hires the Buccos to cater a fundraiser at the Soprano household. We get this shot of Carmela waving over their maid.
Una! There is finger...
And Charmaine clocks this. Later, Carmela gives the wave to Charmaine as well.
Charmaine!
This is to show that while they're all in this tight-knit Italian-American community, class comes first. I think a lot about how essentially what it comes down to in our economy is people with money stay at rest and the people without money have to be in motion. Pretty good. Pretty good idea by me, maybe. What do you think? Carmela sees hiring the Buccos as a sort of charity. Charmaine sees it as a job and money well earned. To get back at Carmela for making her feel shameful about working, Charmaine pretends that she needs to confess that she had sex with Tony when they were young, which is obviously just a jab to piss Carmela off. Also, there's sort of an illegitimateness to the Soprano wealth that Charmaine is hinting at when she's talking about each other's choices. Really, at any moment, the FBI could swoop in and take everything from the Sopranos, which I think adds to Charmaine's disdain for Carmela's attitude. Tony built a business on blood and exploitation. In the same way that Charmaine grilled Artie for accepting those cruise tickets, she feels the same towards Carmela, except instead of cruise tickets, it's for Carmela's whole life. They should take a lesson from Artie and Tony, who settled their class differences with the food fight. Okay, time to nitpick a little here. I mean, I've been nitpicking, but I'm really going to nitpick now. This toss that Tony does on Brendan is sort of so silly. Like, I don't know, when you watch it, I'm like, how strong is Tony? Also, in episode 4, we get this.
Another search warrant? Calls him the Federal Bureau.
There he is!
All of me!
Listen!
Which, this is just clearly not Adriana driving. She just had the stunt double just had to put on the glasses and it would have made sense. But hey, what are you going to do? Also, somehow Tony beats Anthony Jr. playing Mario Kart with one hand, which you can't do because you got to press A to go and you got to steer with the stick. What the hell? And like, listen, The Sopranos as a timeless classic and I love it, but it's almost impossible to make any show without kind of making some weird, silly mistakes. As somebody who works in production, it is so hard to bring everybody together and execute something all together at the same time, the way that you envisioned it. So more just bringing these up is like, this is kind of funny, huh? And while I'm complaining, the dream sequences in the show, I don't really care for. And like, to zoom out, I feel like the significance placed on dreams has waned over the generations. I think now sort of the medical understanding of dreams is that it's the byproduct of our mind filing our short-term memories into long-term ones. While watching a show with a dream sequence, I get the same feeling of someone explaining their dream to me in real life. It's like, okay, wrap it up. The real crux is like, okay, if anything in the dream in the show comes to fruition, it's like, that was lazy writing. And then if nothing in the dream comes to fruition, it's like, okay, why did we see that dream? Even in the pilot, when Tony is talking about the dream where his dick fell off and he sees the water birds, which Melfi connects are the ducks, which leads Tony to this breakthrough that just feels sort of dated. Not a fan of the dream sequences. Just not a big dream guy, personally. Hey, thanks for watching. I love you guys. I love The Sopranos. Gabagool. See ya.